Hi, I have to record this on my phone and it won't let me pause it for very long. So I'm doing this in almost one shot with like brief pauses. And my computer camera's not working. When I read this book, Systems Theory in Action by Shelly Acuna, I thought a lot of Tupac and a lot of things he says, as far as like, say there's like a 17-year-old black male named Joe Bob, and Joe Bob gets arrested for robbing a convenience store. You could describe what happened, saying that Joe Bob did this criminal act and without looking at anything. But that's not, what it's not as simple as that. Say Joe Bob, didn't know his dad and his mom was addicted to crack, and he had a series of, different fatherly figures growing up, and say, he didn't quite belong in church, and he decided to, he joined a gang because he, felt, belonging in a gang. Um, and In that gang, and then there's also, the broader system of, being a black male in America and being oppressed. Um, so in the gang, he, identifies in opposition to another gang. So through triangulation, he, feels connection with his, like big triangulation, like gang triangulation, with his, fellow gang members. But also he, is unable to differentiate, his own feelings. So he just knows he feels belonging when he is with, his gang, but also he can't separate his feelings from his thoughts. So, not thinking through what is, not such a good idea, robbing a convenience store. um, in systems theory, it talks a lot about uh, the difference between either or and both and kinds of thinking. This is on page 14. When we engage in both and thinking, the question we ask um, begin to change. Instead of which perspective is correct, we can ask, how do these two things relate to each other? So in systems theory, like it's not so simple as, someone does not have to be just right. Like both people can be right. Both perspectives can hold a certain amount of weight. People can see different parts of the elephant, but their experience of that part of the elephant is also true. With the example of the people, the blind men just seeing their part of the elephant. Um, Systems theory also talks about how, when we can look at the broader perspective, and it's not so simple as, blame. When we, we look at the problem rather than, as people in a family, blaming each other. You can, isolate the problem, and it talks about a tradition. This is on page 43 at the top. A traditional behavioral approach focused on the ways that parents reinforce their children for undesired behaviors, generally by ignoring positive behavior and giving intense attention to negative behavior. But Patterson and his group took this idea forward in a couple ways. First, in social context, behaviors simultaneously serve as stimuli and reinforcement, so the behavior will elicit a response from another family member, and this response will elicit subsequent behavior. So this relates to how in a system, people trigger each other. It's not that, one thing, not something that not happen in isolation. It is often the result of, something else triggering that, and it's this a function of the system, to just where everybody's just kind of triggering each other. Um, so so it relates to, circular causality, where a behavior No, blame is not linear. Behavior is not linear, but rather, you know, things interact with each other and cause, there's a circular kind of relation. So this is my favorite part of the whole book. It's on page 47, but towards the middle, according to the core concept, early applications of system theory to psychology emphasize the prevalence of both multiple and circular causality. This model counteracts the very human tendency to look for singular linear explanations for behavior. The movement beyond linear causality can correct mistakes that occur from a narrow focus on a single causes and offer greater breadth of intervention strategies. So also in relation, so now also it talks about at some point in the book where since there are many different causes for different things, there's also a lot of different interventions. Like there's not just one single intervention that could be right. There's a lot of different interventions that could possibly work. But it goes on. I just like this part of the book. Most of us harbor primitive and profound wishes to be completely blameless in our life's problems and simultaneously fear we are totally at fault for our own misery. To be able to step back and acknowledge that there are numerous contributors to our problems takes the idea of context a step further. As my husband has pointed out to me in the midst of an argument, you teach systems theory, so you know that it is unlikely that the problem is all my fault. There are many different uh, causes to problems. Um, but also it does talk about how there are problems with circular causality because there is some criticism that you can start victim blaming where someone, an abusive relationship could use it to blame the victim. Um, as far as communication, there's a difference between intent and impact. And um, so this is on page 63. First, the context of the argument must be one of collaboration rather than competition. The therapist needs to make room for both of their viewpoints to help them see how to work together rather than how to win the argument. Second, by employing a circular and multiple causality approach, the therapist can be curious about all the factors that contribute to the argument. Like shifting the context of the argument, employing circular causality, help each partner see how they contribute to the pattern, which will feel different from the pattern of blame and defense that they initially use in describing the argument. So finding that collaborative perspective can be beneficial. So one of the problems of a system is that it doesn't normally want to change. If there is like sometimes the behavior problem in a system is helping the system function. Like the actual issue is, changing the entire system. The system wants to maintain homeostasis because that's how people, are comfortable or relate to each other in the system. Changing the system is difficult, and a lot of the times, like if they're, like there's like, everybody engages in triangulation, and Lucy is the problem child. Well, the family system works because Lucy is the problem child. Like they don't know how to operate without Lucy being the problem child. That's just what they do. That's like it feels comfortable for them in the system. So there's a difference between first order change and second order change. A lot of time, people in a system are open to, small things changing, but a second order change would be something fundamental inside the system changing. So a lot of times, for so sometimes, the reason a system works is because it does provide stability. Sometimes, a system could theoretically change for the worse. Like that's the system is, like that's why things need to kind of happen gradually, because the system operates in, kind of in a program, and it is possible for a system to um, change for the worse. Something I found kind of interesting in the change part of the book was prescribing the problem. So, telling somebody to engage in the symptom, and that, reframe it so it doesn't seem um, like a problem anymore. So, this is on page 82. Um, At times, change cannot be possible or desirable, and an understanding of the current situation, positive reframe, may allow clients to relate to the symptom more adaptively rather than trying to remove the symptom. So, um, I think in the book it talks about a couple who where the wife calls all the time and that causes the husband to stay later at work. The therapist then tells the wife to call more, 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 and then have the husband stay later and later and later. And then that kind of like creates, or they're doing what they're supposed to do because the therapist told them to. So it kind of works in the framework of therapy. And how to both in change. So then, accepting certain traits, but also, finding ways to, change them at the same time. The whole, dialectical behavioralism. Yeah, this book, I got a lot out of. Where we can look at, different behaviors that can be addressed in a system rather than um, having somebody be at fault, blaming somebody in a system where it kind of feeds into the whole triangulation part of a system where blaming serves a function, but also people stay stuck and are unable to get out of like a something some behaviors that aren't serving them anymore. Yes, I had to. My computer camera didn't work, and so I kind of had to rush through this a little bit because it kept on. I'm not super good at editing.